everyone, Mr. E here with a classic CAD tutorial. In this video, I'm going to show you how to create your own custom 3D printed poppets using the Tinkercad design program. All right, now to start, we need a basic shape, and this is going to be the base of our poppet. And obviously in Tinkercad, you have a ton of different shapes to pick from under basic shapes and all the other categories. You can grab letters and things and use your text box tools or create your own shapes using the scribble tool. I'm going to import a vector. Now you can create your own vectors using a free program like Vector, V-E-C-T-R, which you can find on my website, or a more advanced program like Adobe Illustrator, or you can download vector images from loads of different websites. This is just a quick little Vector-E that I created. Now, one of the first important things we need to decide is the size of our poppet. Now, I like to make my poppets around 5 or 4 inches, so I'm going to scale this thing down to be about 5 inches tall by about 4 inches wide, or 100 millimeters by 127 millimeters or so. Now, the next most important measurement is the thickness of our poppet base. So I'm going to set the base of our poppet to be 1.5 millimeters. And my initial layer is going to be 0.5 millimeters. So this is roughly 3 times the height of our initial layer, which is going to give us really good rigidity and really good bed adhesion. This isn't going to be the thickness of the poppet itself, but just a good thickness for the actual print. Now, I'm going to duplicate this shape. And what I need to do is essentially create an interior offset. So I'm going to drag this shape in. And if I just change the color here so I can see what I'm working with, I'm going to drag the shape in to make it a little bit smaller all the way around to actually offset my shape. Now, this works really great for the outside. Doesn't work super great for my ease. So if I center this, we can see that my outside has a good, pretty even perimeter, just like so. But my ease are a little bit off. So I'm going to actually separate this into multiple shapes. That's going to allow me to get a really good offset. Okay, so what I've successfully done is I've broken my shape up into multiple pieces and added some tubes here to give me a good interior version of my shape, which would have been a lot easier if I chose a basic shape or even if I created a vector outline manually. But in Tinkercad, breaking things up into smaller pieces allows you to do much more complicated things. So I'm going to select my interior shape, which is orange. What I'm going to do is I'm going to raise my orange piece so it is 1.5 millimeters off of the work plane, which should be right on top of the blue outer rim. I'm then going to make the orange piece very, very tall, and I'm going to make my blue rim 4 millimeters tall. I'm then going to turn my interior shape into a hole and group it with the blue shape, which now, if I make this lighter so it's a little bit easier to see, we have our original base with an outer rim. Pretty great. Now, the next thing we need to do is I need to go ahead and add rings around the actual poppets. So the rings are going to reinforce the poppet. So we're going to grab the hemispheres, and I'm going to set them to be 20 millimeters by 20 millimeters, which they already are, which is great. And I need to cut these so that they are just rings. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to grab a cutting box, and I'm going to lift it so it is 2.5 millimeters off the surface. Actually, let's make that a full 3.5 millimeters off the surface. Yep, that looks better. And I'm going to group that to my hemisphere, which will give us this kind of flat pancake-looking thing. I'm then going to hollow this out by duplicating this shape and making it 3 millimeters smaller. So I'm going to go to 17 millimeters by 17 millimeters. I'm going to make it taller, and I'm going to center these shapes, hollow the middle one out, and group. And that's now going to give us this ring, which is going to reinforce our poppet. Now, what I'm going to do is I'm going to get this in place, and before we copy and paste this a bunch of times, we're going to create one poppet perfectly, then duplicate this a bunch of times. So we grab a half sphere, and I'm going to dimension this to be 14 millimeters by 14 millimeters, which will eventually fit nicely in. And I'm going to lower this to be 7 millimeters tall. So that's going to fit nicely. Before we do that, I'm going to hollow this out with another half sphere. So I want my wall thickness of my poppet, and this is an important dimension here for successful 3D printing. I want the wall thickness of my poppet to be twice the thickness of my nozzle diameter. So I'm printing with a 0.5 millimeter nozzle. So I want my wall thickness to be 1 millimeter, which means I need to make this 1 millimeter smaller in every dimension. So I'm going to 13, 13, 6. I'm going to turn it into a hole, and I'm going to center these two shapes and then group them together. And that will give me my half sphere with a wall thickness of 1 millimeter, which is a really important dimension. Now I'm actually going to ungroup these two shapes so they're back to being an inner sphere, half sphere and an outer half sphere. And we want to leave that ungrouped for now, just while we get everything aligned. So I'm going to use my alignment tool to align these three shapes. That's an inner cutting half sphere, an outer half sphere, and my ring. And then I can use the duplicate tool to get these in line. Now I can fit 4 columns and 5 rows on my shape. I just need to delete these extra 4 poppets that are off my shape. And what we're going to do is we're going to group everything together. And we're grouping our base, we're grouping the rings, we're grouping the outer spheres and the inner spheres, which we didn't group. So if you look at this from the bottom, you can see that we can still have our cutting spheres. We ungrouped that before, so now when we group all of the shapes together, which for me is 49 shapes, it's going to not only merge the poppets with the base, it's also going to cut the spheres into the base. So if we look at this from the top, we have our poppets reinforced with our rings. If we look at this from the bottom, we have the inside of our poppets that is ready to go. So quick recap, the most important measurements is that your base is a thickness that allows you to have some good rigidity. So I use 1.5 millimeters for my base, I use 4 millimeters for my wall. We have our rings, which actually reinforce the poppet, and this gap is bigger than our nozzle diameter. So my nozzle diameter is 0.5 millimeters. I added about 3 millimeters to this gap. So this is about an 8 millimeter gap to give us space for our nozzle so we don't accidentally have any over extrusions. And then my actual poppets themselves, the wall thickness of the poppet, so the wall thickness of this half sphere, is twice the thickness of my nozzle diameter, which is 0.5 millimeters for my nozzle. So this wall thickness is 1 millimeter. And that has given me some really consistent results. So next, we export this as an STL and drop it into our slicer to prepare for printing. Now, I get into greater detail with actually slicing your model to have successful prints that correspond with our design, as well as selecting the optimal TPU filament and tuning and calibrating your printer in my full 3D printed poppets video and instructables post, which you can find below. Thanks for watching this video. Please don't forget to check out my other ones and subscribe to my channel, as well as stay tuned for future projects on my social media, on my YouTube channel, and on my instructable post. Happy popping.